Hi, this is Dan Sullivan. I'd like to welcome you to the Multiplier Mindset Podcast. One of the biggest differences that I've noticed in the business world since I first got involved in business, which is more than 40 years ago, is the enormous emphasis now on relationship, which wasn't true when I first got into business. Business was much more structured. It was much more predictable. People played much more, what I would say, fixed roles in their business life, where when you came in, let's say in your 20s, and you got involved in business or in a particular type of industry or a particular type of specialty, that was more or less going to be your career. You were going to try to maximize within very predictable structures and processes for your entire lifetime, your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, until you retired. And everybody more or less retired at sort of the mid-60s. And it wasn't so much the relationships that you had, it was that you knew the rules, you knew your responsibilities, there were certain measurements about what kind of results that you had to have. So after you spent maybe 10 years getting used to what you were doing, then it was very repetitive. It was a very repetitive life. I started off in the advertising industry in the early 1970s, and I can remember that things were pretty straightforward. It took you about a year to get used to what the routine was, and then you could have gone another 10, 20 years in that career, and things would not have changed too much. But what changed everything is the advent of the microchip into the entire field of people communicating with each other, people collaborating with each other, people competing with each other. And what the microchip did is that it brought a very interesting factor of unpredictability into the business world, where paying attention to the structures and the rules that were in place when you came into the business world became less and less important because everything was being changed. The structures were being changed, the processes were being changed, and especially the rules were being changed. And when I talk about the rules, I'm talking about the rules of how to be continually successful. And what you began to realize that instead of paying attention to the structures and processes, you began to pay attention to the relationships of the people that you were working with and the relationships of the people that you were working for, namely customers and clients out in the marketplace, and then all sorts of other kind of relationships of people with specialized skills. And instead of everything being the most important thing of what was happening just inside of your organization, what became more and more important was what was happening in the marketplace, what was happening in the industry, what was happening in the economy. So your vision, instead of going just sort of straight up within your own organization, your vision had to be sideways. You had to be watching what was happening. And the single biggest factor was that those people who understood that microchips times relationship became now the new success formula. In other words, that you had to pay attention more and more to those technologies in the form of devices and systems and networks, which made possible for you to get results that were faster, easier, cheaper, and bigger. And then you had to apply those benefits, that getting faster results, to certain kinds of relationships. So people who were used to being trained inside of business systems, or they went to business schools, or they were taught in just a particular trade or a particular occupation, who believed that once they mastered the occupation, then they didn't really have to pay attention too much more to extra learning, all of a sudden found themselves under enormous stress. They found themselves really being threatened because they hadn't been trained, one, to pay attention to the constant improvements in technology, and they also hadn't been taught to focus on relationships. In other words, how are you creating value for this person? How are you creating value for everybody that you're working with? How is that being done with the realization that 6 months from now, the rules on how to create value are probably going to be changed and transformed because the technology of communication and collaboration and cooperation and competition were being changed. So what I have stressed in this multiplier mindset series is that regardless of what happens for the rest of your entrepreneurial career, there's going to be two things that are absolutely true. You can absolutely count on these, and that is that you have to have a mindset with an attitude that you're very, very alert to changes that are going on in your business world, also in your personal world. And you have to be very, very curious about why those changes are happening. And you have to be very responsive to those changes, to change your performance, to change your skills, to change your knowledge. And you have to be very resourceful. You have to take advantage of everything that you've already achieved. You have to take advantage of everything that you've mastered and know, but you have to utilize those in entirely new ways. Okay, so that's the first part of the multiplier mindset. The second part of the multiplier mindset is that you have to focus on ways of doing things in your relationships that are faster, easier, cheaper, and bigger for everyone who's involved in the relationship. So it's a very, very, very different world from 40 years ago in the early 1970s. Very, very, very different world. And there are large numbers of people today who were trained in their jobs to be in a specific type of industry or occupation, and they thought that that was all that they were ever going to need, and they kind of got fixated. They became rigid in that, and therefore their ability to pay attention to how technology, all of it the result of the microchip, how that was changing the world. And they also didn't pay attention that it was relationships. So the new formula for success for the rest of your life will be your ability to pay attention to how technology is multiplying relationship, and then to have the skills and the responsiveness as an individual, both personally and in your business life, to respond to this in such a way that you can always be producing results that are superior, bigger and better. And that means faster, easier, cheaper, and producing multipliers of results. And this is the new formula for success for all of us in our work, in our relationships, in our personal life, for the rest of our life.